The sound of screeching tires and the deafening crunch of metal shattered the silence of the night. I bolted from the couch, heart pounding, and rushed to the window just in time to see the unmistakable flash of Rachel's red dress as she stumbled out of a wrecked sports car. A man followed her, tall, cocky, and wearing a smug grin, despite the chaos around him. Rachel's panicked eyes darted around as she yelled something at him, her voice muffled through the glass. I threw on my shoes and stormed out the front door. She froze when she saw me, her hand mid-gesture toward the man. "James!" she gasped, her voice laced with an emotion I couldn't quite place, fear, guilt, or maybe just annoyance. "Who the hell is this?" I demanded, pointing at the man, whose smirk widened like this was all a joke to him. Rachel hesitated, then crossed her arms defensively. "It's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like," I repeated, my voice rising. "You're in a car with him, in the middle of the night, and it crashes right in front of our house." The man finally spoke, his voice smooth and dripping with condescension. "Relax, dude. She said you wouldn't understand." Rachel shot him a look, but the damage was done. Her silence was louder than any excuse she could have made. My stomach churned as the weight of her betrayal settled in. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about my wife came crashing down, just like that car outside. Rachel's expression shifted from panic to defiance as I stood there, waiting for her to speak. The man leaned casually against the crumpled hood of his sports car, his confidence infuriating. "Well?" I said, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. "Are you going to explain this?" Rachel scoffed, flipping her damp hair over her shoulder. "Explain what, James? That a friend gave me a ride home? Since when is that a crime?" "A friend?" I said, pointing at the man. "Who is he? What kind of friend sneaks around with you at night and ends up crashing outside our house?" The man extended his hand, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Travis. Nice to meet you, man." I ignored him, my gaze locked on Rachel. "Start talking." Rachel's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into the kind of smirk that always appeared when she thought she could outmaneuver me. "You're being ridiculous. Travis is a co-worker. We were at a late meeting, and his car skidded. End of story." "Late meeting?" I spat. "Dressed like that? In his car? And this is the best you can come up with?" Rachel's posture stiffened. "Oh, please. Since when do I need to justify my wardrobe to you? You've always been jealous, James. It's pathetic." Her words hit me like a slap, but it wasn't just her tone, it was the casual dismissal of everything. Travis's smug expression made it worse. He didn't even try to hide his amusement. "Jealous?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You think this is jealousy? This is me watching my wife lie to my face while the proof of her betrayal sits in my driveway." Travis finally interjected. "Look, dude, if it bothers you so much, maybe she deserves someone who isn't so controlling." Before I knew it, I'd closed the distance between us, my fist connecting with his jaw. He stumbled back, clutching his face, his grin finally gone. "James, stop!" Rachel shouted, stepping between us. "What's wrong with you? What's wrong with me?" I yelled. "Are you seriously defending him right now? After everything?" Her voice dropped, dripping with venom. "Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have to go elsewhere for excitement." The words were a punch to the gut. The air around me felt heavy, suffocating. Rachel had never been this cruel, but her mask was slipping, and the truth behind it was uglier than I could have imagined. "So you admit it," I said, my voice shaking. "You've been cheating on me." She rolled her eyes as if the admission wasn't a big deal. "Fine. Yes. I've been seeing Travis. But honestly, James, can you blame me? You're so predictable, always the same routine, always so safe." My jaw tightened, and I took a step back, the anger in me boiling over. "Safe? You mean loyal? Committed? Trustworthy? Sorry if that's not exciting enough for you, Rachel." She crossed her arms and let out a cold laugh. "You act like you're some perfect husband, but you're just a placeholder. Travis makes me feel alive, something you haven't done in years. Her words cut deep, but something about her brazenness shifted the dynamic. The fear and confusion I felt moments ago turned into something colder. You're unbelievable, I said. But you know what? You're his problem now. Get your things, Rachel. We're done. Rachel's eyes widened, the first hint of uncertainty creeping into her expression. You're not serious. I've never been more serious, I said. I won't waste another second on someone who doesn't respect me, our marriage, or herself. Travis, who had been silent since the punch, chuckled, though it sounded forced. Guess that's my cue to leave. Call me later, babe. I wanted to hit him again, but instead, I turned to Rachel. If you go with him, don't bother coming back. She hesitated, her gaze flicking between me and Travis. For a moment, I thought she might stay, that some part of her still valued what we had. But then she grabbed her bag and walked toward him without looking back. As they drove off, the reality of the situation sank in. My marriage was over, and the woman I'd spent years building a life with had destroyed it in a single night. The silence of the empty house was deafening as I stood there, staring at the wreckage in the driveway. My mind raced with memories of Rachel, the good times, the laughter, the moments that made me believe in her. But those memories were tainted now, and the weight of betrayal crushed them one by one. I sat on the couch, trying to process what had just happened. Anger, sadness, and disbelief swirled inside me. How had I missed the signs? How had I let it get this far? But as the hours passed, a strange sense of clarity began to settle over me. Rachel's betrayal wasn't about me, it was about her. Her selfishness, her inability to appreciate what she had, her insatiable need for more. And as much as it hurt, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let her take anything else from me. This was the beginning of something new, and I'd make damn sure it was better without her. The house felt emptier than ever that night, though Rachel had barely taken anything with her. I sat in the dim light of the living room, staring at the blank TV screen, the silence pressing down like a weight on my chest. The truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Rachel was gone, and so was the life I thought we had. But I wasn't the type to wallow forever. The anger was still burning, and it kept me from sinking into despair. If Rachel thought she could walk out of my life without consequences, she had another thing coming. The next morning, I started making calls. First, I contacted our bank. I'd been the one handling most of our finances, and thank God for that. Within hours, I froze our joint accounts and moved my savings into a separate one. If Rachel wanted to run off with Travis, she wasn't doing it on my dime. Next, I called my lawyer. John was a college friend and one of the top divorce attorneys in town. When I told him what had happened, he didn't mince words. She's going to fight dirty, he warned. From what you've told me about her, she'll try to make this as messy as possible. But don't worry, we'll make sure you come out on top. Hearing his confidence gave me a shred of relief, though the thought of dragging our marriage through the courts made my stomach churn. Still, I wasn't about to let Rachel or her new plaything walk all over me. The hardest part came that afternoon when I started packing her things. Every item I pulled out of the closet felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of how she'd lied to me, of how blind I'd been. Her perfume lingered on the clothes, a sickeningly sweet scent that turned my stomach. I found a box at the back of the closet, one I hadn't seen before. Curious and suspicious, I opened it. Inside were letters, receipts, and photos, evidence of a double life she'd been living right under my nose. There were pictures of her and Travis at fancy dinners, receipts for gifts he'd given her, and even notes they'd exchanged. The rage that flared up in me was almost blinding. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the audacity. She hadn't just cheated, she'd flaunted it, confident I'd never find out. I snapped pictures of everything and sent them to John. Add this to the file, I wrote. When I was done packing her belongings, I stacked the boxes by the door. If she wanted her stuff, she could come and get it herself, or send Travis. I wouldn't care either way. That evening, I sat down with a glass of whiskey and tried to make sense of everything. Memories flooded my mind: our wedding day, the first time she'd said she loved me, the countless nights we'd spent dreaming about our future. It all felt like a lie now. Had she ever loved me? Or had I just been a convenient stepping stone until something better came along? The questions were endless, but the answers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what I did next. By the time the sun set, I'd made a decision. This was a new beginning, whether I wanted it or not. I wasn't going to let Rachel or anyone else dictate my future. I'd rebuild, piece by piece, and come out stronger on the other side. But deep down, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The scars Rachel left wouldn't heal overnight, and trust would be hard to come by again. Still, one thing was clear: I wasn't going to let her, or her betrayal, define me. I took one last look at the boxes by the door and headed upstairs. Tomorrow, I'd start fresh. Tonight, I'd let myself feel the weight of it all, because if I didn't face it now, it would haunt me forever. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, calls, and confrontation. Rachel hadn't reached out yet, not directly. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or insulted. Instead, I got a text from Travis. "Hey, man. Let's talk." Talk? The nerve of this guy. I stared at my phone, debating whether to respond. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed back. "You're joking, right?" He replied almost immediately. "No joke. Let's settle this like adults." Adults? This coming from a guy who had no problem sleeping with another man's wife? Still, curiosity and anger got the better of me. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, Travis was already seated, looking smug as hell. His crisp button-down shirt and Rolex screamed arrogance. I sat across from him, my jaw tight, fists clenched beneath the table. "So, what do you want?" I snapped. Travis leaned back, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. "Look, man. I didn't mean for things to get messy. Rachel, she's complicated, you know? But I care about her." "Complicated?" I barked a laugh. "That's your excuse for wrecking a marriage? You care about her? How noble of you." He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, I'm not here to fight. I just think we should be civil about this. Rachel's moved on. Maybe it's time you do too." The audacity of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. "Civil? You expect me to shake your hand and thank you for stealing my wife? For lying to my face? Let me make something clear: you're nothing but a coward. And Rachel? She's your problem now." Travis shifted uncomfortably, the smirk fading from his face. "Look, I get that you're angry. You don't get anything." I cut him off. "You don't get the years I put into that marriage. The trust. The sacrifices. You think you've won something, but you have no idea who you're dealing with." The tension between us was palpable, drawing the attention of a few nearby patrons. I didn't care. I stood up, towering over him. "Enjoy your complicated relationship, Travis. You deserve each other." Without waiting for a response, I walked out, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I'd been holding back for too long, and though the confrontation didn't solve anything, it felt damn good to finally say my piece. When I got home, another bombshell awaited me. A letter from Rachel's attorney had arrived, demanding half of everything: house, savings, even the car. It was laughable, really. She had walked out on our marriage, and now she wanted to bleed me dry. I immediately forwarded the letter to John. His reply was short but reassuring. Let her try. The following weeks were a whirlwind of depositions, court filings, and endless legal meetings. Rachel finally reached out, but not to apologize. She wanted to negotiate. We met at the lawyer's office, and seeing her again was like a punch to the chest. She looked the same, perfect hair, flawless makeup, but the warmth I once felt around her was gone, replaced by cold disgust. "Let's not drag this out," she said, her tone clipped. "We both want to move on." "Funny," I shot back. "You already did." She rolled her eyes. "Do we really need to rehash this? You're being petty, and it's not a good look. Petty? I leaned forward, my voice rising. You cheated, Rachel. You lied to my face for months. And now you expect me to just hand over everything we built together? Her expression hardened, her facade of indifference slipping for just a moment. You don't understand. You never did. Travis makes me feel alive. You were always so predictable. The words stung more than I cared to admit. Predictable. I'd thought being reliable, steady, and supportive was what a good husband should be. Apparently, Rachel had been looking for something else, something I couldn't give her. Then take your alive feelings and get out of my life, I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. But don't expect a free ride. John stepped in then, steering the conversation back to legal matters. I tuned out, letting the lawyers hash out the details while my mind raced. Rachel's audacity was staggering, but I wouldn't let her win. That night, I found myself in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The weight of everything, her betrayal, the legal battle, the sheer exhaustion, pressed down on me. But amidst the chaos, a new resolve took root. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. She could take her lies and her new life with Travis. I was done playing the fool. Tomorrow, I'd start making plans, not just for the divorce but for the life I'd build after it. Because if there was one thing Rachel had taught me, it was this: sometimes, destruction is the first step towards something better. The morning after the meeting with Rachel, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. The guest room, which had once seemed like a prison, now felt like a starting point, a blank slate. I wasn't going to let Rachel and Travis dictate my future. It was time to take control. The first thing I did was call my bank. With John's advice, I'd frozen all joint accounts the moment I'd found out about Rachel's affair. Now I needed to ensure my finances were airtight. Every credit card she had access to was cancelled, every account reviewed. I wasn't going to make it easy for her to leech off me any longer. Next, I called a realtor. The house, our house, had too many memories, and none of them felt good anymore. The laughter we'd shared, the holidays, the quiet evenings watching TV, it was all tainted. I wanted out, and I wanted out fast. When the realtor showed up later that week, she walked through the property with a practiced eye. "You'll get a good price for this place," she said, her tone neutral. "The market's hot right now." I nodded, barely listening. The thought of strangers walking through the rooms where my life had unraveled was unsettling, but necessary. This wasn't my home anymore. It was just a house, a pile of bricks, and wood that no longer held any value for me. Rachel found out about the sale a few days later. She showed up unannounced, banging on the door like a woman possessed. "You're selling the house?" she demanded, her voice shrill. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Why do you care? You left, remember?" Her face twisted with anger. "That house is half mine." "Not anymore," I said coolly. "You forfeited your claim when you decided to shack up with Travis. But feel free to have your lawyer call mine if you want to waste more money." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right insult. Finally, she settled on. "You're pathetic, you know that? You think selling the house is going to fix everything?" "No," I replied, my voice steady. "But it's a start." I shut the door in her face and leaned against it, my heart pounding. Standing up to Rachel felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, one small victory in a long battle. As the weeks passed, I threw myself into the logistics of starting over. I found a smaller, more modest apartment on the other side of town, far enough away that I wouldn't accidentally run into Rachel or Travis at the grocery store. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Moving day was bittersweet. Packing up my life, boxing up the remnants of a marriage that had crumbled, was harder than I expected. But as I loaded the last box into the truck, a sense of relief washed over me. The new apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaos of the last few months, but I welcomed it. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I started picking up old hobbies. little things I'd abandoned during my marriage. I dusted off my guitar, hit the gym, and even signed up for a woodworking class at the local community center. Life wasn't perfect, it was far from it. The divorce proceedings dragged on, Rachel's demands growing more absurd with each passing week. But every time I felt like giving in, I reminded myself of the lies, the betrayal, the look on her face when she tried to justify her affair. One evening I got a call from an old friend, Mike. We hadn't spoken much since college, but he'd heard through the grapevine about my situation. "Man, I heard what happened," he said. "That's rough. How are you holding up?" I hesitated, then answered honestly. "Better than I thought I'd be. It's been hell, but I'm getting through it." Mike chuckled. "You always were a tough bastard. Listen, if you ever want to get away for a bit, come visit me in Colorado. Fresh air, good beer, it'll do you good." The idea stuck with me. A change of scenery sounded appealing, a chance to leave the ghosts of my marriage behind, even if only for a little while. The next week, I booked a ticket. When I arrived in Colorado, Mike was waiting at the airport, grinning like a kid at Christmas. "Welcome to freedom, buddy," he said, clapping me on the back. The trip was exactly what I needed. We hiked through breathtaking mountains, fished in pristine lakes, and spent evenings swapping stories over beers. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. It wasn't just the escape that helped, it was the perspective. Being away from the constant reminders of Rachel and the life we'd built gave me the clarity I needed. I realized something important. Rachel's betrayal had shattered my world, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, still standing, still capable of building a new life. By the time I returned home, I felt lighter, as if the weight of the past few months had finally lifted. The battle wasn't over, but I was ready to face it head on. Because this wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving. And for the first time in years, I was determined to do exactly that. Life slowly began to settle into a routine. My days were filled with work, gym sessions, and the occasional woodworking project. Nights were quiet, often spent reading or catching up on shows I'd missed during the chaos of my marriage. It wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm Rachel had left in her wake. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call that changed everything. It was a Wednesday evening. I was in the middle of sanding a coffee table I'd been building for my new apartment when my phone buzzed on the counter. The number wasn't familiar, but something compelled me to answer. "Mr. Anderson?" a deep voice said on the other end. "Yes, speaking. Who is this?" "This is Detective Lawson with the Westbridge Police Department. Do you have a moment to talk?" My stomach dropped. The police? My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. Had something happened to Rachel? Or worse, had Travis done something? Sure," I said, setting down the sandpaper. "What's this about?" "I think it's better if we discuss this in person," Lawson replied. "Can you come down to the station tomorrow morning?" The ambiguity was maddening, but I agreed. That night, sleep was impossible. I replayed every interaction with Rachel and Travis, every decision I'd made since finding out about the affair, trying to figure out what could have prompted this call. The next morning, I walked into the station with a mix of dread and curiosity. Detective Lawson was a tall, no-nonsense man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. He gestured for me to sit in a small, windowless office. "I appreciate you coming in," he said, pulling out a file. "I want to assure you that you're not in any trouble. But we've uncovered some information that we thought you should be aware of." My heart pounded as he opened the file. "This is about Rachel," he began, glancing up at me. "What about her?" I asked, my voice tight. He hesitated for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "We've been investigating a series of fraud cases linked to a local group. Your ex-wife appears to be involved." "Fraud?" I repeated, stunned. He nodded. "Financial scams, to be specific. Forging documents, embezzlement, laundering money. And from what we've gathered, her new partner, Travis, is one of the key players." The words hit me like a freight train. Fraud? Embezzlement? It sounded absurd, like something out of a crime drama. But as Lawson laid out the evidence, it became clear that Rachel and Travis weren't just cheaters. They were criminals. How does this involve me? I finally managed to ask. We don't believe you're involved in any wrongdoing, Lawson assured me. But your name has come up several times in our investigation. It seems Rachel was attempting to access joint accounts you had closed. We believe she may have been planning to use your financial information to further their schemes. The room spun. I felt like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. So, what happens now? We're building a case, Lawson explained. But I wanted to warn you. If you still have any financial ties to her, you should sever them immediately. And if you have any information that might help our investigation, we'd appreciate your cooperation. I nodded, barely processing his words. Yeah, of course. Anything you need. The rest of the meeting was a blur. By the time I left the station, my head was swimming with questions. How deep was Rachel involved? Had she been doing this during our marriage? Was that why she'd been so desperate to cling to the house and our accounts? The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Rachel had always had expensive tastes. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, dinners at the finest restaurants. At the time, I'd chalked it up to her being high maintenance. Now, I wondered how much of it had been funded by legitimate means. Back at my apartment, I called John. He listened silently as I recounted my meeting with Detective Lawson. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. Damn, man, he said. I knew she was bad news, but this is next level. No kidding, I muttered. What do I do now? Follow the detective's advice, John said. Make sure all your accounts are locked down. And stay out of it. Let the cops handle Rachel and Travis. His words were logical, but I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that clawed at my chest. Rachel hadn't just destroyed our marriage, she tried to destroy me. The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls and paperwork. I worked with my bank to review every account, ensuring there were no lingering connections to Rachel. I even contacted a cybersecurity firm to check for any potential breaches. Through it all, one thought kept gnawing at me. What if I hadn't found out? What if Rachel had succeeded in dragging me into her mess? As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. Rachel's betrayal had set me free. Her lies, her schemes, her selfishness, it was all behind me now. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days following my meeting with Detective Lawson felt surreal. While I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, my mind was constantly on high alert. Rachel's betrayal had already cost me so much, my trust, my peace, and nearly my sanity. Now, knowing she was involved in something criminal, it felt like I was living in a bad crime novel. A week later, I got another call from Lawson. We've made progress, he said. Rachel and Travis are under surveillance. We suspect a major transaction will go down soon, and we're preparing to make arrests. It was strange to think of Rachel being arrested. The woman I'd once loved, who I'd imagined growing old with, now reduced to a common criminal. Part of me wanted to feel pity, but all I could muster was a bitter sense of satisfaction. She'd chosen her path, and now she was facing the consequences. But things weren't as straightforward as I'd hoped. That evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. Her name on the screen made my stomach churn. I hesitated for a moment before answering. What do you want, Rachel? Her voice was a mix of desperation and urgency. James, I need your help. I scoffed. You're kidding, right? After everything you've done, you think I'd help you? Listen to me, she snapped, her usual venom creeping back into her tone. This isn't about us. It's serious. Travis is in deep and She hesitated, her voice cracking. I'm scared. For a brief moment, I considered hanging up. But something in her voice stopped me. Fear. Genuine fear. Scared of what? I asked, my tone cold but curious. There's more to this than you know, she said. Travis, he's not who you think he is. He's dangerous. I thought I could handle it, but. Her words were cut off by a loud noise in the background, followed by muffled shouting. Rachel? I said, my voice rising. What's going on? James, please. Her voice was frantic now. Meet me at our old spot. I'll explain everything. Just, please come. The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Rachel, scared? Travis, dangerous? It sounded like another one of her manipulations. But the fear in her voice had been real. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my keys and headed out. The old spot she'd mentioned was a park near our former home, a place we used to go when we needed to talk. As I approached, the park was quiet, illuminated only by the faint glow of streetlights. I spotted Rachel sitting on a bench, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked different, disheveled, her usual composure replaced by raw panic. James, she said as I approached, her voice trembling. Start talking, I said, keeping my distance. She glanced around nervously before speaking. Travis isn't just running scams. He's connected to people, dangerous people. I didn't know at first, but now. She trailed off, her eyes wide with fear. And why should I care? I asked, my tone sharp. Because they're after me now, she hissed. I tried to back out, and Travis lost it. He said if I left, they'd come for me. James, they think I know too much. Her words sent a chill down my spine. As much as I despised her, I couldn't ignore the possibility that she was telling the truth. What do you expect me to do? I asked. Play hero for the woman who ruined my life? Just help me disappear, she pleaded. I can't do it alone. Please, James. If you ever cared about me. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to guilt me. You made your bed, Rachel. Before she could respond, the sound of tires screeching broke the tense silence. A black SUV pulled up nearby, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Rachel's face went pale. They're here, she whispered. The doors of the SUV opened, and two men stepped out. They were large, intimidating, and clearly not here for a friendly chat. Run, Rachel said, grabbing my arm. I hesitated for a split second before following her. We sprinted through the park, the sound of footsteps close behind us. My heart pounded as we weaved through trees and bushes, trying to stay out of sight. This is insane! I shouted as we ducked behind a cluster of trees. What the hell did you get us into? I didn't think it would go this far, she whispered back, her voice shaking. The men were getting closer. I could hear them shouting, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Stay here, I said, pulling out my phone. What are you doing? She asked, her eyes wide. Calling the cops, I said, dialing Lawson's number. Rachel grabbed my arm. No! You can't. Too late, I said as Lawson answered. Detective, it's James Anderson. I'm at Crescent Park, and we've got a situation. Two men. Before I could finish, Rachel screamed. One of the men had spotted us, his flashlight blinding as he approached. Run! I shouted, pulling Rachel to her feet. As we took off again, I couldn't help but wonder how the hell my life had come to this, a twisted game of cat and mouse, all because of the woman who'd betrayed me. Rachel and I tore through the park, her grip on my arm tightening with every step. The men's shouts grew louder, closer, their flashlights bouncing erratically as they chased us. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but adrenaline kept me moving. There's a maintenance shed near the edge of the park, Rachel gasped, pointing ahead. We can hide there. Reluctantly, I followed her lead. The shed was old, its wooden frame warped with age. Rachel fumbled with the rusted latch, her hands trembling, while I kept watch. Hurry up! I hissed. The latch finally gave way, and we slipped inside, closing the door as quietly as possible. The darkness enveloped us, the only sound our ragged breathing. What the hell were you thinking, dragging me into this? I whispered harshly. Rachel didn't answer immediately. She leaned against the wall, clutching her sides, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know who else to call," she finally said. "You're the only one I can trust." I let out a bitter laugh. "Trust? From you? That's rich." Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw a glimmer of the woman I'd once loved. But it wasn't enough to erase the damage she'd done. The sound of footsteps outside snapped us back to the present. The men were close, their voices low but urgent. "We know you're here!" one of them shouted. "Come out, and maybe we'll let you walk away." Rachel tensed beside me, her nails digging into my arm. I put a finger to my lips, signaling her to stay silent. The doorknob rattled, and my heart stopped. I scanned the shed, spotting a rusty shovel leaning against the wall. Grabbing it, I positioned myself near the door, ready to swing if necessary. The door creaked open, and a flashlight beam sliced through the darkness. One of the men stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. "Now!" I shouted, swinging the shovel with all my strength. The metal connected with his shoulder, and he stumbled back, cursing. Rachel bolted past him, screaming, and I followed, dropping the shovel as the second man lunged at us. We sprinted toward the street, the park's edge finally in sight. Blue and red lights flashed in the distance. Lawson had arrived. Relief washed over me as two police cruisers screeched to a halt, officers jumping out with guns drawn. "Hands up!" one of the officers shouted, aiming at the men behind us. Rachel collapsed onto the pavement, sobbing uncontrollably. I raised my hands, trying to catch my breath as Lawson approached. "James, are you okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning me for injuries. "I'm fine," I said, glancing at Rachel. "She's the one you want to question." The officers quickly apprehended the two men, who cursed and resisted but were ultimately overpowered. Lawson knelt beside Rachel, his tone firm but calm. "Rachel, this is your chance to cooperate," he said. "Tell us everything, and it might help your case." She nodded weakly, her face streaked with tears. "I'll tell you everything," she whispered. I stepped back, letting the cops do their job. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave her to face the consequences of her choices alone. But another part of me, a deeper, more conflicted part, felt the weight of years spent together. Lawson approached me again, his expression unreadable. "This isn't over, James. We've uncovered enough to implicate Travis, but Rachel's testimony will be crucial. You may be called in as a witness. Do what you have to do," I said, my voice flat. As the chaos unfolded around me, I realized how far I'd come since discovering Rachel's betrayal. The man who once felt paralyzed by her lies, who spent sleepless nights questioning his worth, was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, someone who had faced the storm and come out the other side. Epilogue. Rachel cooperated fully with the authorities, leading to Travis's arrest and the dismantling of his operation. She received a reduced sentence but lost everything: her reputation, her freedom, and any semblance of the life she once had. I chose not to attend her trial. There was no satisfaction in watching her downfall. I'd already moved on. Months later, Lawson reached out with an update. "Travis's operation was bigger than we thought," he said. "Thanks to Rachel's cooperation, and your courage, dozens of people have been brought to justice." It was a small comfort, knowing something good had come out of the chaos. As for me, I started over. A new city, a new job, and a new perspective on life. Trust wouldn't come easily, but I was determined not to let Rachel's actions define my future. One evening, as I walked along the waterfront in my new hometown, I reflected on everything I'd been through. Betrayal, heartbreak, danger, it had all shaped me in ways I never expected. If there was one thing I'd learned, it was this: life doesn't end when someone betrays you. It's painful, yes. Devastating, even. But it's also an opportunity to rebuild, to rediscover who you are without the weight of their lies. I wasn't the same man Rachel had tried to destroy. I was stronger, wiser, and finally free.